Many people have claimed over the years to have been abducted by aliens, and realistically, there's no tangible evidence that any human being has ever actually set foot in an extraterrestrial spacecraft or another dimension or anything like that. It's just these crazy stories from people that claim this happened to them. And while many of these stories are very quickly cast aside as absolute hoaxes, not true, not accurate, there's one story, one abduction story, that is universally regarded as the most believable and most famous alien abduction story, and that is of Travis Walton. What made this case so famous is that unlike all of the other alien abduction cases, where there was never any proof, it was usually one person's first-hand account. In this case, you have a full-scale police investigation. You have up to 16 lie detector tests that were taken by Travis Walton himself, along with the other witnesses and people that were there, and you have a group of 6 level-headed guys that actually witnessed the abduction take place and have stuck to their story, and had passed all lie detector tests and have never changed their story in 40 years. And you would think that at some point you might change your story, because they came under incredible scrutiny. I mean, it basically derailed most of their careers and their lives because they were labeled as crazy people for believing that a UFO had abducted Travis Walton. I mean, in a way they became famous, but in all the worst ways. So you have all these elements that make this story seem fairly credible. And even if this wasn't an alien abduction, let's say, how do you account for the past lie detector tests that are talking about UFOs? How do you account for the fact that Travis Walton was really missing for 5 days and has no idea where he was, and there was a full search effort to find him in the area where he would have been? So lots of unanswered questions, but the story itself of when he was actually abducted, and then his own story about what happened once had been abducted, it makes for just an incredible story. It's been converted into books and movies, and to this day, it remains one of, if not the single most fascinating purported alien abduction stories ever. But before we get into today's story, if you are a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, well then you come to the right channel, because that's all I do. And I upload 3 to 4 of these stories every week, so if that's something that interests you, I would encourage you to gently extirpate the like button, and then subscribe to my channel, and turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my weekly uploads. Alright, let's dive into the story. By 1975, Travis Walton, who was 22 years old at the time, had developed a bad boy reputation in his hometown of Snowflake, Arizona. He rode a noisy Harley-Davidson motorcycle through town. He was a wild bull rider, and he was a boxer. And there was the story about Travis when he was with his friends in a car, and they were driving down this road, and a bear jumped out of the woods and landed in the middle of the road and was just standing there, and Travis, without any hesitation, leaps out of his car and chases after this huge bear and scares it into the woods, and in fact chased it up into the woods. So Travis was just known as this kind of rebel, problem child a little bit, but he was beloved by his friends. He was just like one of those cool guys. He did it his own way. So Travis and the 6 other men that he worked with were loggers. They were given contracts, and they would go out, and they would clear trees in a certain area. They were not big time with huge equipment to do this. We're talking chainsaws, saw and regular saws and axes, and they would just go out, these blue-collar, like hard-working type guys, and they would clear areas of trees. That's what they did now. These 7 men, they did it. They did a dangerous job. I mean, you're cutting down these huge trees, and you're usually working pretty quickly. You're operating, chainsaws that are pretty dangerous. And Mike Rogers, who was the crew boss, who's there the day of this event, he described in a number of his interviews that, the men that he hired to do these jobs, they needed to be incredibly level-headed. They did not strike you as people that would have this fantastical, alien encounter story. On November 5th, 1975, Mike Rogers was given a contract to clear out this huge 200-acre plot of land inside of the Sightgraves National Forest, and he grabbed his crew. They piled into the one pickup truck that Mike owned, and Mike knew that this was going to be a really, really difficult job. It was a huge area to cover, and he told his men up front, we're going to be working really, really hard, so expect long, full days. And so over the first 3 days of the job, even though they were working, long hours and barely taking any breaks, they were behind shed about that first engagement with the 6 crew members, that they were obviously shaken up by something. Something had happened. They don't know what it was, but they were shaken up, and what Sheriff Gillespie believed was that they were creating hoaxes to cover up a real crime. He believed that they had harmed Travis Walton and they were using a UFO to cover it up. But he also was thinking to himself like, this is a bad hoax. It's not very well planned. They don't really have their stories really lined up particularly well. They're not doing a good job explaining it. The only thing they're doing well is acting scared. A couple hours later, the sun's starting to come up super late when all this happened, and Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copeland have organized this huge search effort up in the forest where Travis had gone missing. And the crew members, they're all there as well. A bunch of volunteers showed up. They are scouring the area. I mean, they got dogs out. They got these huge teams looking everywhere. And they can't come up with anything. I mean, they're looking everywhere. There's no sign, there's nothing. There's nothing from Travis. And so while this is all going on, Sheriff Copeland and Sheriff Gillespie have started coming over to Mike Rogers and the rest of the crew and being like, hey, if you just tell us where Travis Walton's body is, like, we'll go easy on you guys, like we know you did it. And they can feel that the pressure is really mounting, that they don't find Travis even though they didn't do anything according to their story. They're going to face serious repercussions because that's the way the world works. You don't get to say aliens did this and not have any blame placed on you because there's no proof. They just have their own eyewitness testimony, that's it. And so the crew has started to become very worried about what's going to happen. They're worried about Travis, of course, but they're starting to see that, like, they're going to be prosecuted for this unless they find Travis, and so they're all very stressed out. And they noticed during the search, this first day of searching, that these three guys wearing red jackets had these tools that were scanning the ground, almost like a metal detector. And Mike Rogers, he was hoping that during this investigation that they would have people come out that were like paranormal investigators. I guess maybe he was naive to think that the police would actually do that. But he thought, given the fact that we've all said this is a UFO that zapped Travis who then disappeared, that they would have at least one person representing the kind of paranormal side of the investigation coming out. And so he sees these guys in red with their special tools that seem like a metal detector, and his gut says they're paranormal investigators. And so Mike goes over to them and he's like, hey, what are these tools you guys are doing? Like, what is this? And they look at him and they're like, oh, well, this test for radiation, we're scanning for radiation in the area. And he asked him, like, what group are you guys? Whether you with the sheriff's department, they just didn't really answer him. They said, oh, no, we're just checking for radiation in the area. That's just what we do. And Mike sees an opportunity because when that ship emitted that ray of light that ultimately blew Travis Walton 20 feet, and then you evaporated him or something, they were within range of that big ball of lightning. And they were very much in the kind of cone where there been radiation coming off of that ship. He believed that perhaps they would have been hit with it. And so we asked the guys with the red jackets on in there, their little radiation tools to scan the crew's jackets and bodies to see if they were radioactive. And so the crew comes over and they scan them, and there's nothing, no trace elements of radioactivity. They're like, no, there's nothing. And then Mike realizes that from the time they called the sheriff until the search, they had all the crew gone home and changed, then come out to do the search. And so we thought, well, then, any of the radioactive materials would have been on our clothes, which aren't here. But we have our hard hats in the back of the truck that were out here the whole time. They were potentially exposed to whatever was out there from the ship. Can you test those? And so he brought over one of their helmets, and the guy in red scans his helmet, and the ticker goes through all the way over, fully radioactive. And the guy in red, looked up at Mike, can look down at the helmet he's scanning, and he's looking at him kind of trying to size him up. And then he turns any kind of gestures at the other two in red and tells him to stop doing what they're doing. And they come over, and they're scanning the helmets as well. And then without any indication of what the results were, what this meant, because Mike is kind of waiting for them to tell them what's going to happen, the guys in red just turn around and, get them to come back, but they're not turning around, they're just leaving and then they're gone. And so Mike goes over to the sheriffs, who they know the sheriffs think they did something to Travis. These are not their friends, but they figured we need to ask them who those guys in red were. So they go over to Sheriff Gillespie and they're like, hey, who are those guys in red jackets with the radiation detectors? And Sheriff plus B's like, who? There's no one here. Looking for radiation, everyone here is here because I ordered them to be here. Who are they? Where are they? And he's like, they just walked over there. They went around the corner there. And Sheriff Busby was like, well, I didn't order them there. And it would turn out that they couldn't locate these three people. No one knew who they were. Mike went around and asked anybody who seemed like an authority figure, If they knew who these people were, they asked people that interacted with them and no one knew. So after the search that goes on for a couple of days turns up nothing. There's no sign of Travis. The town of Snowflake, Arizona, really turned on the 6 crew members. Everybody believed that they had done something to Travis. You know, that this UFO thing was a hoax and they harmed Travis and they were using this as a cover-up in the sheriff department. They really perpetuated that. They were pretty open about this is not a UFO situation. This is not an alien abduction. This is a missing person case, and frankly, we believe the UFO thing is a hoax. National and international media had picked this story up, and it became this massively viral story all over the world, and news media outlets are converging on Snowflake, Arizona, and they're inundating the sheriff's department with requests for more information about this alien abduction. And it's really frustrating the 2 sheriffs who are leading this investigation, Sheriff Gillespie and Sheriff Copland, and they were already skeptical and really upset about feeling like they were being taken advantage of by these crew members, this hoax, right? I said what they believed it was, and so Sheriff Gillespie and Copland decided, you know what, we're going to just cut through all the BS here, and we're going to make these boys take a lie detector test. So they go out and get one of the country's best polygraph examiners to come in and administer a lie detector test on each of the 6 crew members. And so one by one over the course of the day, each crew member was tested for 2 hours. Same questions, all centering on the criminal side, to kind of foul play angle for Travis Walton. They all go through it, and it turned out that 5 of the 6 had all shown that they were telling the truth, and the 6th person, it was just inconclusive. It didn't mean that he was lying. It just meant that the test wasn't done very well. And this polygraph examiner had any from a 92 to 98% accuracy rate. He was one of the best in the country, and he even would say like it would be so difficult to fake that to have 5 people. Let's say this is all a big hoax and they harm Travis Walton. It would be almost impossible to have 5 people be able to pass my examination and have nobody slip up. They were telling the truth. And so the examiner tells the sheriff, and Sheriff Gillespie is dumbfounded because he believed that they were going to find out they were all lying and that this could just be a pure criminal investigation, and it would be, let's go find Travis Walton's body. But now the examiner is saying they're telling the truth. And so Detective Gillespie and his partner are like, now what do we do? And then 5 days after Travis's disappearance, Travis shows back up during numerous interviews. Travis would say that he remembers waking up on a road, and he didn't recognize where he was. But it was nighttime, it was raining, and he sensed a very bright light above him, and so as he's laying and it turns his head to look up into the sky, and he sees what looks like the underside of that ship, because he remembered how struck he was by the beauty of the kind of engineering underneath that disc UFO. They saw in the forest it looked the same. As his vision was not great, but he's looking up, and he's pretty confident that's what he's looking at. And then it flies into the sky and it's gone, and he's left in total darkness on a road in some place he doesn't know. And he remembers standing up and feeling very weak and depleted and dehydrated. And he just knew that he had to get to civilization. He had to just go in a direction and find someone who could help him, because he was so weak, and he would die out there if he didn't find someone who could help. And so he musters the strength to stand up, and he starts kind of staggering down the road, and eventually through just adrenaline he just starts running. And luckily he sees up ahead there is a rest stop, and at rest stops there's payphones, and he makes his way down and he goes to the payphone, and he ends up calling his brother. And his brother he can't believe he's talking to Travis, because Travis is probably supposed to be dead at this point. He didn't believe it was Travis. The Travis just said to him over and over again, "It's me, they brought me back," and he tells him where he is, because now he recognizes that this rest stop is actually in Snowflake, Arizona. When his brother picks him up, Travis would say that he believed that this was just minutes after, the initial abduction. He didn't even know he had been abducted. This is like he's coming to, and he's like, man, what happened? Like, I was just over at that clearing where I saw this ship, and now I'm over here, like, what am I doing here? And so Travis, his brother, is looking at him like, where have you been? We've been so worried about you for the past several days. And Travis, it was kind of almost catatonic. He's in shock. He doesn't know what's going on. He looks at his brother, and he's like, what you mean, dazed? And his brother's like, you've been missing for 5 days. And so Travis would say that when he heard this news, This revelation that he had been missing for 5 days, it absolutely put him into shock. He was in a catatonic state where he couldn't make sense of it, and so he just sat there quietly, and his brothers looking at him, not really sure what to even ask. He asked a couple times what happened, and Travis just didn't answer because he didn't know, he couldn't explain it. And so Travis's brother decides, instead of just immediately calling the police, I want to bring you to a hospital, because clearly that needs to happen, frankly, with the media circus as soon as they find out. You're back. It's just going to be mayhem. And I want to make sure you're taken care of first. So he drives to Phoenix, Arizona, and he brings him to a hospital. And he asks the doctors to be discreet. And he has a doctor too. An examination. The doctor knew who Travis Walton was because even following the news, and he's doing an examination of Travis, and, he was malnourished and he was tired and looked very sick. But there was no physical wounds, with the exception of hit one puncture, site in his arm, and the crook of his arm. Travis was not a drug user, so it wasn't like that was, a mark from using drugs. It was a puncture site, and they assumed someone had recently put a needle in his arm. And also, the doctor drug tested him and tested his blood, and there was no drugs in his system. It wasn't like he'd been using any sort of substance, so he kind of had a clear bill of health, the injection site, and looking pretty ragged. And so, after the examination, Travis's brother brings Travis back to his home in Phoenix, Arizona. As soon as they get back, his home phone is getting constant phone calls. It had made its way to the sheriff's department back in Snowflake, Arizona, and they're nonstop calling Travis's brother. Like, hey, we hear he's back, we have to talk to him. Jericho SP, he drives all the way to Phoenix. He goes in and he sits down to talk to Travis. And Sheriff Koleski would say that Travis looked like he was in shock. He looked like he had been through something traumatic. It did not seem like he was acting. And he starts asking Travis what happened. And Travis, he does mention the UFO. He mentioned seeing this thing in a clearing. That he gets struck by some light. He doesn't know what it was, and then, he's on the road 5 days later, and he can't really make sense of what happened. He just didn't really know what happened over the 5 days, and finally Sheriff Gillespie just kind of definitely give up. He's like, well, we have no way to arrest him, that we have no proof of anything. And so we decided we're going to be in touch, and he drives back, and then media starts showing up, huge news. Truck starts showing up outside. Everybody found out because this was a huge story where he was, and everybody wanted answers. Finally, the National Enquirer, they reached out and they said, hey, if you give us an exclusive story, if Travis speaks to us about what happened to him, we will get you out of here. We'll bring you to a private location, and we'll even pay to have Travis undergo a whole other battery of tests that are not typically done to see if they could figure out what had happened to him. And so they agree to go with the National Enquirer. So by the time he's actually sitting there looking at the National Enquirer, he's had a little bit of time to maybe let his memory kind of kick back in about what had happened. And he's having these flashes of memory of what happened over those 5 days, because initially all he could remember was seeing the craft and then being on the road 5 days later. And so when he's sitting down with the National Enquirer people, he begins to recall what actually happened over those 5 days. And so, this is what he said happened. He said that he remembers getting out of the truck and walked to this craft. Was about to turn around and head back, the craft started moving. This loud kind of mechanical eerie sound is being made, and before he had a chance to run back, he gets hit with this lightning bolt of some kind. Then he remembers being in the presence of some doctors. He saw a white lab coat's mask and facial coverings, and he's kind of in and out of consciousness, and he's, this orange light around him, but he definitely sees what looks like medical professionals. And he's thinking to himself, whatever happened with that ship, it must have hurt me, and my crew must have scooped me up and brought me to the hospital. And so in an ounce state, he's aware that he's around medical professionals, at least what he believes are medical professionals, and at some point his vision clears. It goes from foggy and he's in and out to being pretty much lucid. And he looks down at his chest, and there's a rectangular box sitting on his chest that he didn't recognize it. Didn't really look like modern medical equipment. It just looked like this, almost like rock sitting on his chest. And he looks at that, and then he looks up at one of the people who's wearing a mask, who's working on him, one of the medical professionals, and this person is working on this box, and then the person looks at Travis Walton, and then leans in to look even closer at Travis Walton, and Travis is horrified. It was this grayish, thin, narrow-headed figure that was very short, me like 4 feet high, who was looking in at him, and its eyes were like slits, and it's looking at Travis. And Travis, who's unbelievably scared at this point, pushes everything off of him and rips out all the cords that are attached to him. Gonna topples off of this table that he was on, and he realizes he's in a fairly small room, and there's 3 of these humanoid creatures in the room with him, and he picks up the biggest instrument you can see next to the table that he was just laying on. He didn't know what it was, and he starts wildly waving it at them and screaming to Lima like, "Get away from me." And he's trying to make sense of what he's looking at, and the 3 figures and lab codes start walking closer and closer to him, and they're just kind of looking up at him, trying to study him a little bit. They get all the way up to him, and he's waving, and he's almost about to hit one of them when they just kind of abruptly turn around and leave the room, leaving him alone in this kind of examination room. And as soon as they leave, he watches them go down a little outside the door, down the little hallway, and they turn left. And so he's practically paralyzed with fear, but he knows if he can't get out of this room, he's done for. And so finally he kind of gets himself together, and he walks past the examination table. He goes down the hallway outside of the door, and instead of going left where they went, he kind of sneaks off to the right and starts walking, and he comes to another room, and it's a room that has a single chair in it. It's this tiny little room with a chair, and the chair is turned away from him. It begins to peer around the chair, and he sees that no one is sitting there. So he goes in front of the chair, and he's like touching the wall, looking for a doorknob or any sort of mechanism that can get him out of this room. And he said like the room, it was like this perfectly flat. Everything was flat and smooth. There was no door handles, couldn't find a way out, and he ultimately sees on the chair that it looks like there's some buttons on the chair itself. He pushes all these buttons on the chair and nothing happens. And then in the doorway where he came in, suddenly a man appears in the doorway who's wearing what looks like a spacesuit, like an astronaut suit. And Travis is so immediately relieved, even though the weirdness of him being in an astronaut suit is pretty high, but he's like, it's a human, and he doesn't know what to think about the fact that he's now excited to see a human. Right? Like, it's terrifying that you were just around these non-humans. But he's like in panic mode now. He sees another human being, and he runs over to him and he says, "Please, you gotta help me. I don't know where I am. Where are we? What is this? What's going on?" And he notices that the eyes of this person inside of the spacesuit, it's a man who at least looks like a man, but his eyes are distant. He's not making eye contact with Travis. It's like he's in a trance, and he said his eyes just seemed off, like they weren't focused on him. It would be like if you're talking to someone, but they were like permanently looking away from you. There was just something off about him, and he never spoke. And so he's trying to ask this guy, like, "Where are we?" And the guy takes him by the arm, and he just starts leading him back into the hall where he came from, and continued down the hall, not back towards the room where he was originally, but down the hall in the other. That this is his savior. And he feels relieved that a human being, albeit a strange human being, is helping him. And eventually he stops asking him any questions, because the guy in the spacesuit is just not reacting to him. They open the store, and they go down into this huge hangar where there's all these spacecraft that look just like the one that he saw in the clearing, that Travis saw in the clearing. And they start walking down between all these spacecraft that are just hovering, much like they were hovering in the forest, seemingly able to just defy gravity. And the whole time this guy in the spacesuit saying nothing, and Travis is like, "What is this? What are these craft? Is this military?" saying nothing. They walk to the far side of the hangar, and they open up another door, and they go into another that's bright white room, and there's 3 more human-like people with the strange, I think, going on in spacesuits that are standing there next to another medical table, and they're looking not at Travis, but their bodies are aimed in the direction of the door that came in through Travis goes in, and he sees these 3, and he thinks these people are here to save me. Like, again, I feel relieved to see humans, albeit strange humans, but nonetheless humans, and the guy who had brought him in there continues to lead him over to the 3 other people, and they pick him up and they put him the table. He starts kind of resisting because he doesn't know what they're doing. "They're not speaking," he said. "What are you doing?" And they forced him onto this table, and he's feeling pretty weak at this point. And they take a gas mask, and they put it over his face. And then he blacks out, and his next memory after that is when he woke up on the road and had the light above him that flew away, and he had to the payphone to call his brother Travis, did not immediately go and speak to the crew members that were there that night. It took quite a bit of time, He was talking to press, he was, doing interviews, the police wanted to talk to him. There's a lot going on. But he eventually got together with the other 6 crew members, and they all met up at Mike Rogers, the crew boss's house, and they just said, "You gotta tell us what happened." And so he sits down and he tells the story. All of them believed him. They didn't want to believe him, but they believed him because they saw the first half of this story they saw for themselves, and once he was done telling it, they didn't really have that many questions. They just felt bad. They felt like if they had just stayed there and taken Travis, he wouldn't have been taken. But they didn't know that. And so all of them would leave Mike's house that day, and they would all go their separate ways. They did not stay in touch. They went their separate ways. It was like this hugely traumatic event that even to this day, you have 40 plus years later, when they talk about it, they're often brought to tears. Ken Peterson. His interviews are particularly striking because when he talks about it, he's an older man now, and he says to this day, "I'm scared to look out my window because I'm afraid I'm going to see a spaceship," and he starts crying. When he talks about it, this had a profound impact on these 7 men. And some of them didn't do so well. This whole story, it ruined their credibility. Even though this is, the most believable alien abduction story, that the truth is most people think it's a hoax. One of them, like his own family, basically disowned him because they felt so embarrassed about this whole story. They don't believe him. So if this was a hoax, like, to what end? What did they get out of it? Nothing. It damaged their lives following this case over the span of 40 years there. There would be 16 lie detector tests, taken 5 by Travis Walton and 11 by the remaining crew, and they would all pass the one member of that initial polygraph set. When 5 had passed and 1 was inconclusive, he was retested the same exact test and he did pass. It's just one of those things where we're left with this incredible story where modern technology says telling the truth, but we can't fit that truth into what we think of as normal life. And so we've just decided that there's going to be a group of people that believe, and there's me, a group of people that don't. And you're left to pick which side you're on. So I'd love to hear what side you sit on. Was this a hoax? Was this an abduction? Was this something else? Let me know in the comments what you think, and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you. And if you haven't already, please gently extirpate the like button, and then also subscribe to my channel. Turn on all post notifications so you don't miss any of my 3 to 4 weekly uploads every week. If you want to get in touch with me, you can message me on Instagram. My handle is JohnBallin416. I'm also very active on TikTok, where my handle is Mr. Ballin. That's going to do it, guys. I hope you enjoyed.